and welcome to the States of Matter, a podcast from the Institute of Refrigeration's Women in RACHP network. I'm Karen Perry, and here to co-host is our network chair, Lisa Jane Cook. This episode, continuing our theme discussing subjects of interest for our industry's women, we talk about allyship and how important it is not only for women but for all marginalised groups to promote and aspire to advance a culture of inclusion through intentional, positive and conscious efforts. I'm excited to say hello to the founder of our network, Mr. Steve Gill, a known ambassador of our refrigeration industry and ally of many. And a warm welcome also to Lee Chambers, founder of Essentialised Workplace Wellbeing and award-winning keynote speaker. A very warm welcome to both of you.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to be here this afternoon.
So I guess, Lisa Jane, I'm sure you've got some questions ready to ask.
I have. I've got lots of questions, but I just really wanted to say that I'm really excited to have you both here. You are both great allies to us. So it's just a privilege to actually have this opportunity to take a bit of a dive into what motivates you and your career paths. So actually, I suppose the first question or thing that our listeners might be wondering is actually what it is to be a male ally. So I'm going to ask Lee first, what that actually means to you.
Yeah, so being a male ally to me is very much a case of thinking, considering and taking action based on being an advocate, an accomplice and an occasional disruptor, looking and considering about the spaces that we're in, because we live in a world that, whether it's institutions, systems or structures, has pretty much exclusively been built by men. And just being able to take a step back and appreciate how facilitated lives are for men and how some of the challenges that we don't go through ourselves might impact others, and how we can be part of actually addressing some of those challenges, about highlighting some of those challenges and being able to actually make changes to systems and structures so they benefit everyone.
Yeah, and actually even you, as you're saying that, it resonates quite strongly. We don't have a lot of women in our industry. There are probably sort of, it's below average, but there's a greater number in support and admin roles, but actually in technical roles, it's still a very low number. And I think in part that is down to the challenges, and it could be everyday things such as PPE to, like you say, environments that are not designed for women. I've worked in spaces where there aren't restrooms for women or locker facilities, so you just get thrown in with the men. And while that doesn't bother me, I think it's not necessarily always fair on them. And Steve, what is it? Well, what does it mean to you? I mean, obviously, as our ally in our industry, our leading light.
Our leading light. Oh dear, that's worrying. I think it's. I mean, Lee put it so well, but it's not about me. I think it's being about others, and it's multifaceted. But it's being a sponsor to marginalised co-workers. It's thinking about others, and all those sort of things that go with it. There's so much in our careers, in our jobs, in our lives, where we have to be about us. We have to be about ourselves. We have to push ourselves forward. But then we'll be all working teams, and I think it's being recognizing an ally is the real essence of being a team player. You involve everybody. It's no use. Yes, we all like to use a sporting analogy, we all like to either save the penalty or score the goal, depending what position you're in. But we have to involve everybody else, and I think that's what it's about for me. Not being about me.
We talk a lot about people, and we were talking about this earlier about people-centered management and thinking about other people, and to me that's about being honest as well. You have very career-driven people who are maybe a little bit about what I want to do and where you want to end up, but actually, be honest about it and be open with others so that we're not kind of elbowing each other out the way, and it is about supporting each other and just being kind to each other and appreciating everyone else's aspect of what they want to do as well.
Absolutely. And so and being a male in a predominantly male industry, it's also about owning our privilege. We have to recognize that some things are easier for some than they are for others, and we can't rely on our own experience. So many, and I do it as well. We look at others and think, oh well, if I was in their shoes, well, we've never been in their shoes, quite possibly. We have to accept them as individuals with different experiences, and that takes a mind shift, or it did for me anyway. Because I thought everybody was the same as me, and it didn't. It took a while to realise that they're not.
That is really true as well, isn't it? We are all very different. We've all had very different experiences. What I find really sort of helps me as well, and it's not necessarily that I've had the same experience as someone else, but to remember where I came from and what I've been through and how that impacted me. So that really helps me to relate to people, to at least have some empathy for their situation. So aside from what ally or what being an ally means for you, actually what motivates as well? You know, you're saying that you do it in a particular way, but what actually made you want to change the status quo?
So I suppose mine is quite a long journey to get to the point where I am today. And I've only still really, I would say, taken a few steps across that bridge into allyship. I think there's still so much more that I can do, both individually and collectively. But for me, it was kind of born from, I kind of sit in a place where I am of lesser privilege due to my ethnicity and my disability. And yet I was always very driven to look beyond what was impacting me to what was impacting others. In the early 2010s, I had and ran a tech company in the video game industry. And we had a 70-30 gender split in our team, which at the time was seen as progressive, but actually reflecting back made me not as aware of some of the challenges as I should have been. And I didn't listen to my female employees' specific challenges as much as I could have. And it took me losing the ability to walk and spending, a lot of time recovering to actually start to process that and realise. That kind of took me on a pathway where I spent 4 years as a stay-at-home dad. And suddenly, after spending a whole lifetime in male-dominant environments, I spent a lot of time in female-dominant environments and heard stories of grandmothers who were the first generation into the workplace and everything that they'd faced, and the stories of mothers, the discrimination they'd been through, the NDAs they'd been forced to sign, the abuse and harassment they'd had. And I just finally got space to listen. And that's really the first step in allyship, is being able to listen and be curious about other people's experiences. Because as Stephen kind of said, when you do that, you realise that you might have started your life on the starting line. Some people started outside the stadium and are still at a point where they're by your side to this day. And you never know how far someone has travelled until you sit there and listen to their stories. And that's kind of now taken me onto a journey through my own work where, I do a lot around well-being as a concept in the workplace. And I was just shocked to hear at the lack of, gendered health kind of insight into how well-being was being delivered in the workplace, because there are significant challenges that women face in the workplace that, well-being strategies just weren't considering. Things from menopause through to menstruation, through to specific challenges around fertility, stuff like, PCOS and endometriosis. And there's just the awareness in the workplace was just not there. Why? It's another kind of structural concept in society of keeping these topics as muted things that are considered to be almost dirty and taboo. But it's just health, natural. Why? And I just got rather angry at the lack of fairness and the lack of exposure to these things, to a point where I said, like Stephen said earlier, I've got an element of power, an element of privilege, a platform. Why don't I use that in a proactive way to challenge and bring other people on that journey, while actively working behind the scenes to seeing what I can dismantle, tinker with, challenge, and really cause a little bit of friction, because that's how we often start fires that create change.
I'm going to say, what a fantastic answer. When you asked the question, I'm glad I let Lee went first, because I was going to say listen as well. For many of us, listening, is just waiting to get our answer back. You really have to actively listen, and that's helpful in many aspects of life. And it's not until you either, as Lee, found the space to do it, or you do it consciously, that suddenly you hear a lot more. And I think I became a sort of a confidant to co-workers who were sharing their experience. And once you hear them and you really hear what they're saying, it's quite horrifying. And I think Lee touched on it, but being, I kind of said friction or something, or being, creating. It is really about see something, say something, or do something. You cannot be a passive listener as well and be an ally. You have to actively listen, and then you have to act upon that. See it, say something, see something wrong, hear something wrong, act upon it. I think that's key to it all. I don't think that answered the question. It was really building on Lee, because I was so impressed with Lee's answer about listening. I thought, oh, I wish I'd said that.
What sort of response do you find that you get maybe in sort of larger corporate companies when talking about allyship? Do you get a kind of an immediate recognition, or do you still get a little bit of a blasé feel from men particularly?
It's quite interesting, Karen, because as a topic, allyship's become almost a bit of a challenge. There's a massive gap between people saying they're an ally, but actually doing the work behind the scenes and actually making a difference. Some people have taken the badge and feeling good about it, but not actually inciting any change, which is kind of making the topic a bit of a challenge. From a company's perspective, we generally see like a small group of men who are really actively engaged, but then a really wide set who are kind of like started to lean in, but are not really sure what to do. They're a bit like, is this diversity inclusion stuff for us? It's side of desk kind of stuff. Do we want to, once we kind of step in, are we going to have to challenge our own feeling? And I think there's a massive proportion of curious men kind of on that line. But the reality is that for a lot of men, you need to look at yourself first before you start on the journey. And what I found is there's two really interesting camps, like a group of men who in a bit of a paralysis because they felt they used to be the good guys. They were the ones who, you know, they weren't directly harassing women. You know, they weren't the ones who were, you know, causing significant challenges and doing things that were, you know, overtly misogynist. So they felt they were the good ones, but actually they've realised that my kind of tolerance and passiveness has actually meant that these things have continued to happen. So actually I'm not very good. And I'm a bit like coming to terms with that before I move on. And a kind of a group of other men as well who are like, I have to unpack my own emotions before I can go. And I have to look back on the things that I should have called out that I didn't, that I feel ashamed about. And I need to reflect back on the things that I've said, that I'm guilty, and feel disappointed in myself. And the challenge is that a lot of men are not the best at unpacking those negative emotions to kind of start and kind of have that ability to start to move into it. Some organisations are better than others, but there's still a challenge where a lot of men are like, but if we do this, if we set off on this journey, if we create gender equity, it's going to take away opportunities from me. It's going to take away opportunities from men. It's like it's going to be a disadvantage to me. And we're seeing resistance. But what I'm saying is this isn't about men versus women. This is about collaboration. This is about creating more equitable spaces for everyone. And actually, it's not pie. You're not going to get less if we generate equity for women. You're just going to have a better team to bake a bigger pie together. And everyone's going to get more pie. And who doesn't want that?
I love that. And I think, yeah, unconsciously we do sort of unconscious bias as well, that we all think that we're open. And like you say, you probably look at yourself in ourselves in history or what we've done throughout our careers and long careers of different things or maybe that wasn't right. But actually it's the acknowledging it and changing now is what's important.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of sets in a whole range of challenges, but for some men, it's kind of helping them feel confident to lean in and not feel like they're going to say the wrong thing, or have spaces where they are actually able to, you know, self-educate and educate each other. And, you know, sometimes you kind of, you feel that resistance towards stepping in because it feels uncomfortable. It feels like a new space. It feels like somewhere where I'm not massively competent. And again, it's just helping, like, you don't need to be massively confident and an expert in this to start. You just need a little bit of curiosity, willingness to maybe relearn some things and unlearn some others maybe, and an appreciation that the same gender stereotypes that negatively impact women also negatively impact men.
Yeah.
By the other side of it, maternity discrimination, you know, makes men feel like they can't take paternity leave, for example. And it's like these things intersect. If we didn't, you know, label women as emotional and hysterical and crazy, then more men would speak openly about their mental well-being, because emotions wouldn't be a negative thing.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things that impact women also impact men, and it's just helping them to appreciate and understand that too.
I think educating yourself as well, it's so important early on and part of the journey, because you have to be aware of your own shortcomings as well as your own strengths. So that there is a self-awareness bit and an education. But it's in terms of the large organizations, I think was Karen's question. I find that it sort of on the outset it falls into two camps. So there are loads of men who welcome this and jump on it. They want to champion. There are loads of champions at the moment of women's cause. It doesn't mean they're allies, and it doesn't mean that they're not necessarily, but there are many who like to get on their soapbox and write emails or do their talk at the town hall meetings and say why equality, women's rights, all these things are so important. And then they do nothing after that. That's it. They've ticked that box. Then they move back to their usual behavior. And then there's the other camp who feel threatened by it. And again, Lee's touched on that. Yeah, there is some way again. There is for the men that they are going to have to give some things up. He's right. The pie is greater for all of us. At the same time, it doesn't mean that the pie is exactly the same as it was. And so there is an element of, I can't go on doing what I've been doing. There has to be a change. But I think in large organizations, particularly, and I mean that in not necessarily the workplace, in large groups, I think creating a community of allies is one of the things. You can help bring the right people out. You can encourage others to involve. And mostly, and I have to say mostly, as we're talking about men or any allies, people want to get in, but they want to do the right thing. Deep down they want it, and they're just looking for the opportunity. So creating the right community, and that involves the women as well. Women in HVACR, and that's why we did all the things we've done. The International Women's Network. That sense of community really does change the world, and working with the right people and connecting with them.
I recognise as well, even within business, I think you mentioned it there, Steve, men and women. Often I challenge women that maybe complain about a space or where we're not comfortable or anything, but what are you doing about it? It's just as important. You can't rely on other people to be that voice and to make that change. It is to be part of that as well, and just not kind of express it as a problem. But
it's hard being a lone voice though, isn't it? And that applies to both. Maybe harder for if you are in a marginalized sector, you're not one of the minorities, but even if you're in the minority, being a lone voice is always difficult.
We have to treat this as a journey as well. I think often people sort of like put off even starting it, because it is a really big change. It's a really big shift in not only our sort of environments, but it is in your own mindset, and you have to be ready for that change to start off with. So you need to have yourself in that right place, but you have to also accept that you're not going to be perfect from the off. So no one is suddenly an ally overnight. It's a journey. It's about taking ownership of the things that not only that you're doing right, but also the things that you're doing wrong, and actually sort of learning from those mistakes, and maybe not even treating them like mistakes but lessons. But I do think we can get there, but there is quite a big hurdle still to get over.
And some of that comes with confidence as well. We're all at different stages in our career. You've said it's a journey. We're all on individual journeys. I know certainly from my own perspective, I wouldn't have long ago insisted on, the panels. When I was first invited to be a judge on an industry panel, wow, that was a big step. If they all turned out to be old white men, I'd have been quite happy. I was just part of that. I was just happy to be a judge. But as you move along that journey, and we're all on different journeys, and confidence comes with that experience, I'm able to say, no, unless there's, unless I insist on a diverse group, and that's something that, if we're all on that journey, we all grow together with it.
Yeah, definitely. And in a similar way, you look back and you realize that it's not necessarily intention, but you don't always know what you don't know. That's not an excuse to just not know anything and not continue to learn and develop as a human being. But there's that consideration where it is a journey, and I kind of reflect back, and the seeds of this were planted for me, 2016, 2017, 6 years ago. And I think sometimes people see that, suddenly someone becomes vocal and feels confident in expressing it, and they feel that they've suddenly come from nowhere and had this epiphany moment. But actual true allyship is a formation process. It's like fermentation. You almost need to bring stuff together and let it stew, and you kind of put together some of those dots from your own experiences. You go out there, you self-educate a bit, you go back, you test, you observe. It's very much like a scientific experiment. And it's not that you just turn up one day and you're suddenly, a really kind of powerful ally in a space, and you're able to be vocal, but also know when to decenter and deplatform yourself, and when to help others become amplified from the marginalized groups you're an ally for, knowing when to put people forward and when to kind of remove yourself. These are things that you're never going to get them right straight away, but it's called, we live in such an outcome obsessed world that people want to become really great allies straight away after doing a course, and it's just not the case. It really is a developmental process, because you are advocating for something that you probably unlikely to have been through a lot of the things and have direct lived experience. But that listening aspect, you gradually just get more jigsaw pieces to put together so you can feel more confident to explain to another what the jigsaw shows. And I just think it is a matter of time. But what's really funny is I went back and talked to my female employees after being unwell. And what I heard was quite amazing, because I just simply wasn't aware of it because I'd not asked the questions. And actually, sometimes it's the power of the questions that you can ask that will incite the answers that you get to able to find a few more of those pieces. But like Steve said, there is no perfection in this. There is just a creeping step of progress every now and again as you open yourself up to learning, open yourself up to others' experiences, and just appreciate again that, we all start in different places. And once you kind of think about the things that people might have been through, it gets you curious about just that wider humanity piece, because everything comes back to just being a good human. And for a lot of men, they started the journey because they wanted to be a better leader, or they wanted to be a better partner, they wanted to be a better father. Quite often, it's not a business case that gets men started. It's wanting to be a better human.
It's funny you say the father thing, because I get a lot of messages from men who now have young daughters that are asking me, how can I promote these careers? How can I, create a better world for my daughter? And that I absolutely love. When you've become a father and you've had a daughter and all of a sudden the penny drops, you don't want that world for your daughter. Sort of going back a bit, you talking about being a stay-at-home dad and the fact that you use that opportunity to talk to women and to understand the things that they've been through. But I'm quite curious about how you were received in those environments, because there probably weren't many dads on their own with their children. They do go along with mothers sometimes if they've got a day off, but actually to go into that environment on your own, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, so I think at first, when I actually floated this idea to people I was connected to, I got some interesting responses. Someone referred to me as well, that's a bit of a loser thing to do, isn't it? So someone said it was like the equivalent of career suicide. But some others were really supportive and said, just go and be that example in the room and show those, young toddlers, those young boys who are toddling about, that this isn't just a place for mummy, but it's a place for daddy as well. And it just got me thinking how I could potentially role model that. I suppose what it kind of made me realise, in the space, what you find is some mothers were more welcoming than others. Some warmed up a little bit over time. Some of the ones who were maybe a little bit standoffish at first were probably the ones who, after they kind of got to know me a little bit, were the ones who probably felt safe enough to share some of the more shocking stories. And someone said something recently that I'd never thought about it at the time, but the fact that, mothers were actually willing to talk to me and open up about some of these things must have meant that they felt safe to do so. And how many spaces do they actually have to be able to do that in the everyday world? And that really kind of made me think, because how many things, I suppose it comes back to the systemic thing around women, or the way things are communicated and the way systems and structures are. is that it makes women think that they are the problem and therefore they should blame themselves. And you look at the messaging and it's always, well, she shouldn't have gone there, she shouldn't have walked there, she shouldn't have worn that, she shouldn't have asked that question. And it's only now that we're creating a space for people to be able to share these things that women are realising, actually, it's not me, it's a whole system thing, it's happening to everyone. But no one's been able to speak about it because they've all felt like it's my fault. And I suppose, hearing that in that space and the share, because one person would start to share something and then another would kind of join the conversation and be like, that's happened to my friend as well. And then someone else would join and say, well, that didn't happen to me, but this did. And all of a sudden you're just exposed to a whole world of experiences that you've simply not got the lived experience of. But it just shocks you to realise what other people are going through. And you're kind of floating through life oblivious, not even aware of it.
No, and that actually is a really good way also to get sort of things going in the workplace, is if you've got someone that's affected by a particular thing, it is really difficult to speak up about it. But even if not directly affecting me, sometimes I do like to sort of start having that conversation. And when you're in those open spaces, you find that quite often people will open up and share. It might not necessarily be the same thing, but it's another story that they, they've kept it to themselves. It may have been impacting them. It's really good. And I mean, Steve's, like Karen said, a founder of our safe space in our industry. He's really helped bring women together who, quite frankly, like I said, there aren't many of us. And
there's more than you think. There's many more than you think. And I think that. I won't say it's a myth because, yes, there's not as many women as there are men. But one of the things, and you and Karen have heard this story before, when I started the sort of the launch of the women in RACHP and the getting, I was told I was wasting my time because there weren't any. Why are you doing that? There's 5 of them, 6 of them, 10 of them, whatever number you can. It was perhaps sometimes more than single digits, but it was very low numbers. And I said, well, actually, there's a lot more. They're just hidden. And I think we're finding that there are many, many more than people imagine. Yes, not as many as the men. That's absolutely true. But once you start to connect, and I won't say they come out the woodwork, it makes them sound like woodworm, but they do appear.
I think you're right, Steve, because it was traditionally it was the exhibitions and dinners and shows that were just predominantly male. I guess that's it. With kind of from a women's side, the women didn't attend as much. I've probably been to quite a few in my time, but then that's because I've been pushed forward to. Whereas now you recognise it more. And I know even last week having a conference at work and someone commented on, oh, it's amazing to see so many women like now in our company. And I was kind of, is it? But to me, I don't recognise it like that. I don't kind of look, oh, there's lots more women here now. I just see a normal functioning company. But I think, it was, as a male, it was to sort of, it's almost,
there's a lot more visible. Yeah, I sat on a similar table not so many dinners ago, and it wasn't quite equal. I think it was probably equal. It was just one of these odd things where the seating plan worked out that it was arranged that way. I said, it's great to see so many women. I said, well, how many of you have just started in the last couple of... Well, no, we've been doing that for 20 years. They weren't newcomers. They've been there all the time.
Yeah.
They just hadn't been attending these events.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important that we challenge panel lineups and challenge who's picked, and thinking about that fair allocation of exposure and visibility and opportunities from not only from a representation and role modeling perspective, but from a fairness perspective of opportunity, because we kind of know that there's an opportunity gap for women in a lot of industries because of the same people sending the same people each time to get the exposure, the opportunities, forging the conversations. And we need to be actively, as an ally, part of looking at that and calling out when things aren't right. And I know both me and Stephen do it, where we've challenged panel lineups and said, we're not speaking unless you sort out the diversity across this panel. And you know what? I appreciate events are a lot of work to put on, but when it's really, really obvious that it's not being considered, we have every right to call that out. And that's part of that. Really, more people should be doing that. If you see a panel and you're like, this isn't representative of, different strands of diversity, then we should be kind of looking and asking those questions. So who have you approached? And ultimately saying, you know what, you've got a responsibility, because whoever you put on that panel is going to get, that exposure, that visibility. Opportunities will come from that. Don't keep expanding the opportunity gap with your own kind of, lack of consideration.
I think sometimes it's human nature. It's not that they do it consciously. I'll say they're lazy. They're all rushed, and they just go to the usual people that they always go to.
Yep.
I'm guilty of it at times. I need something new. Who can I go to? I pick up the phone to somebody I know. And that's the way panels have always worked. You go to the judges. Oh yeah, we'll use them. And I remember it was one of the industry panels. I was approached, said, "What's the makeup?" And they told me, and I was just at the stage where I was getting more confident. I said, "Hang on, we need at least one woman on there, for goodness sake, more." But we don't know anyway. So I wrote them a list of 30, sent them a list of 30 potential women who are more than capable and suitably qualified and experienced to go on the panel. And wow, where did you get these names from? And this was somebody who'd been in the industry a long time, and it was actually a woman. And she said, "Where did you get these names from?" It's human nature. We take the shortcuts all the time. I just want to pick on something Lee said, because it's just, I always wanted to be a stay-at-home dad. That's just, I really I was just the junior in engineering, so I was on very low pay when we had our daughter, and my wife was going to go back to it. So I did a month when she went back on, after the end of maternity. But because she was on much more money than me, my wife, that was it. I was going to give up, and she was going to carry on. But she did a month at work. She said, "No, this isn't for me. You've got to go back and earn some real money." So I had to go back into the workplace. So I did it for a month, but I'm really jealous that you did it for longer. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, and I'm well aware it was a massive privilege to be able to do that, because a lot of other men that I know either weren't in the financial position to be able to do it, or they simply didn't have the support structures in place. And the more men that I speak to now, the more that want to, but there are some barriers that still exist, and whether it's, whether it is financial or structural, or even down to the role that they have, being flexible enough to make it happen. It's something we keep kind of advocating for and really pushing for. But it's just this consideration that men don't want care and responsibilities. And actually, from spending that time with my kids, I'm a better human. I'm more curious. I'm a better communicator. I'm more present. I'm definitely more patient. And I'll tell you what, it's really honed my negotiation skills. I'm now a next level negotiator, thanks to spending 4 years at home with 2 toddlers, trying to win the negotiation battle and generally losing.
It's worse when you have 2 as well, isn't it? Because they tag team.
Mm-hmm.
You get railroaded into things. You say yes to something, like one will ask if they can have fruit and the other asks for ice cream, and you're saying yes to the fruit, but the ice cream won.
And it's all pre-planned as well.
Yeah. It's really funny. But 4 years at home would be amazing. Like with my first, I had 6 weeks and then I was back full time. Part of that was financial, but part of it also, because I was working in a role that was traditionally filled by men, there was no flexibility in that role. So it was a case of you're either off or you are back full time, and that is it.
That's a really good point. The whole workplace and the volunteer space and just about everything to do with it is evolved around a predominantly male model, and that's the way it's always been. So to challenge it, you're not only challenging the presence of the men, you're challenging the way they've worked for a long time, including the women. We've always had meetings at this time of day. We've always done this sort of thing. They go, no, you don't have to. Why not rethink everything we're doing? And that gets, you see their eyes rolling. Sometimes you have to break it down into simple steps then and say, well, what about we arrange it outside the school run, for example? Oh, yeah, okay. Then you have to break it down.
I often recognise that within my own experience in being a senior leader within my business, and the other females that are within that group. Probably 90% of us have not had children and have not had career breaks. So it also does go against that. We're in that privileged position because we've not taken a career break, that you've been able to develop your career. And it is recognising things like that. I think having that empathy, like with meeting times, like with travel for maybe training courses, or it's not as easy for everyone else to kind of leave that home life and that caring responsibility.
I think we've seen more flexibility over the past few years, and the pandemic has played a role in that. But what I still find fascinating is we've had about 100 years of the 5-day work week. And it used to be the 6-day work week. And why did it change 100 years ago? Because too many men were going to football on Saturday and not going to work. That's the reason why it changed. Right. So, we can actually make quite a significant change. But yeah, why not have, time with your kids? That's probably more important than the football at the weekend, right? We can have But no, it's good to see flexibility in the system. Companies are starting to see and tackle some of these challenges with kind of shared parental leave and actually expanding upon that and really giving opportunities and structures. Part of it now is the supporting men to feel supported through the process, because it still is in a lot of organizations seen as, taking care of responsibilities and putting a pause on your career, which I hate that kind of terminology. It's not, your career is going to span for years. Like, I'm approaching 40, but I don't know when I'm going to retire. There's a long scope and a long runway to have a few years at home with my children. And I knew that if I didn't do that before they started school, then it's difficult. You don't have as much time. But the bond I got with my kids now, there's no amount of money I could have earned in that period, no amount of time I could give back when the teenagers and they're grunting at me because they don't know who I am. You're never going to get that back. So it's a massive investment. And if you have the ability to do so, you should. And hopefully we can create a world where more people have opportunities to do that as well. And advancing gender equity does that for men. It's one of the outputs, one of the aims, one of the goals, and one of the things that will come if we do that and we move forward. And that's where a big piece of the pie comes for a lot of men who want to do that.
It's making the space comfortable for them to be able to request that as well, and not feel that they can't, because the caring responsibility is the job of the women as well.
Yeah, and I meet a lot of women who have caring responsibilities upwards and downwards, and that's just standard. That's just what you're expected to do, and that plays a significant role as well. It's those expectations when we can make places comfortable for men to also step into those roles, feel more confident to do so, and have the capacity. Really, a big part of it is about redefining what masculinity is in the modern day, and that can be taken either down two pathways. One, to create a more modern masculinity where kind of caring, empathy, compassion are traits that are valued, or down the other way, which we don't really want to talk about on this particular podcast.
Yeah, I do actually still think we have got a long way to go. And like you say, there is a lot of companies now that are creating that kind of flexibility, but I wonder still other bits that we're missing. And it's not something that people talk about a lot, but you're having this wonderful life event and then the most terrible thing happens and perhaps your partner loses the baby like mid-term. How often do we think about the fathers in that situation? Or like you say, sort of upward care as well. So when you lose a parent, or there's so much that we just think, well, you'll have a couple of days off and that means you've got time to get everything in order, but we're not actually dealing with the emotional side of it. And it would be nice to actually get to a situation, and while all the time we're always talking about improving equity for women, it is actually having like that backward thought and actually reflecting on what it is like to be a man living through those situations as well.
Yeah, and that's where it runs in tandem, because if we're able to actually look at things that impact both sides but maybe a bit differently, such as fertility challenges, child loss, it impacts both sides. Obviously, one more directly because there's a physical aspect to it as well. But if we start to look at how we advance on one side, it pulls both sides together. And actually, it stops being about sides and starts to come about collective support, which is, trying to weave things together rather than it being like these two distinct and separate, appreciating that there are differences, but starting to celebrate the commonalities in how we can make, workplaces better for everyone. Allyship is about helping foster those connections so both can move upwards together. Yeah, it's not about giving up that privilege or power that you have. It's about using it to change the system so that everyone can rise.
Yeah, one of the just you're making me think on sort of my mind went on a tangent when we're talking about allyship and all rising up together. My mind went off to the STEM thing, which I know, and STEMazing, which is Alex Knight's baby and brainchild, which both, well, certainly Lisa James. But have you been on STEMazing, Karen, as well?
I am currently doing it.
You're currently doing it. So
I have my first lesson on Friday.
Yeah.
I'm not nervous about at all.
But it was just the allyship. It's it's been traditional that the men go, because of we were the guys going into the schools, particularly the older ones, as gaps appeared in their work schedule or the seniority, that they could make the time to go into schools. And then now with far more women are going in, which is great, and the unconscious bias of being formed with children, all that sort of thing is probably part of a separate discussion. But it did mean the men were having, in a small way, having to give up something, because a few men came back and said, well, why are we doing this for women? Why are we not doing STEMazing for men? Well, we can, but sometimes you have to make this difference. And there is something about giving something up as well. So it's not just the change. Being an ally also means sometimes taking that step back and saying, no, we have to make this room for them. And it was something, I can't remember what Lee said. There was something, he didn't mention STEM or anything like that, but it was just this sort of making space and stepping back, which is so important. It's such a key. And it went back to your first question about being an ally. And it's not always but being the person, I'm going to go into school and I'm going to tell those young girls they really could be engineers. I don't think it'd be right. It's far better if others do it. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but it's something Lee said that took me there.
Yeah, I think it's giving up that fair share, isn't it? It's not giving up something, it's just allowing a fair share for everyone. And I think, Steve, I've heard similar in kind of why is it women only, but when you are part of that group, you do appreciate that it is pushing people forward that wouldn't necessarily normally do it themselves.
Yeah, and I just think it's that case again of where people start and allowing people to catch up. And I try and phrase it in terms of like a bit of a race, because everyone can conceptualize that. And what's even better is I'm meeting with Alex on Tuesday, because we're going to look and see how we can potentially collaborate as well. So
I think everybody on this call would sing Alex Knight's praises. So
again, we have to thank Steve for that introduction in our industry. Alex messaged me on LinkedIn probably about a year before Steve suggested that I should look at her, and she said, we're putting these videos together of these women in STEM, we want to put you on the website. And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, maybe. And then actually when it came to it, I just didn't have the confidence to do it. And then you fast forward 12 months and Steve's introduced her to our industry, and all of a sudden I'm going on this program with her, and then the result was I made a video and it's on her website. It was a really big leap forwards.
Yeah, and what was really powerful is when I was first introduced to Alex about 18 months ago, I went on the website and saw you, Lisa Jane. So before I met you in person.
It is lovely to be in this community and to have the kind of company that we do. And obviously, Lee, we've met you through the Rising Stars. But both you and Steve have had so many awards for the work that you've done. And we know, and I know the same thing. I didn't start off as a D&I advocate, but it's kind of where I've ended up. And it's just like, so you've got to start that journey, and it's, where you sort of come from and where you're going to. And this isn't the end of it. And I'm sure that we're all still going to be knocking around together for a few years to come. Yeah.
I think the power of social media as well. I saw our friend Kat Parsons won her Diva Award as well this week, which is great when you kind of do see people that you've kind of been networking with and talking to that are actually just, power of what she's doing is great. So really well deserved award.
And I mean, awards, there is a bit of, is that showboating? Are we, why are we doing that? Is it self-promotion? There is perhaps a bit of ego in there. I love accepting awards. Who doesn't? But there is more to it than that, and I think that much more to it. And we're seeing the fruits of that, that visibility coming through now, and have them for a short while. It has been a long slog, I have to say. the issue, I think Lisa Jane said, the challenges are still very much there. Don't be completely fooled by these awards and this visibility that we've got. The challenges are still almost the same as they were, but the visibility is getting better. And it's thanks to you guys for keeping it going.
We're definitely growing a team. And hopefully, in this year and the years to come, we're going to see more and more of our colleagues, peers, allies actually winning awards for the work that they're doing. We can't do this on our own, and we are stronger together. So we have to keep doing what we're doing to inspire and, really just build that team. And, we're not going to be around forever, and we probably won't want to do this forever as well. So it's creating that, for the future, isn't it?
I think we recognise as well, don't we? It's the next people that, we need to inspire, mentor, that can then lead the way in their own networks and their own groups as well.
Yeah. And if you do allyship properly, it is uncomfortable, it is tiring, and you do need a support network. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I think me and Stephen probably do, is we are kind of like recruiters in that industry, trying to pull other people on the journey so they can also then kind of do the same to their networks. And I think it's very much an ecosystem thing. Yeah. And you are seeing more people now running around with torches, lighting those little piles of kindling, and just kind of, lighting up those slightly darkened corners so that more people can see. That creates visibility for everyone, but it also creates visibility of the change you can make. And, I speak to senior leaders quite often, and there is a lot of, this inclusion stuff. It scares us a little bit. If we say the wrong thing, we'll end up in the papers. I'll end up getting sacked. Because of all this, I'm less likely to get a new position. There are a lot of concerns, but one of the biggest ones is I'm starting to feel a little bit irrelevant, because diversity and inclusion become something that's, a lot more powerful than it was 10 years ago. But actually, your relevance comes in being part of the change, not being scared of the change. And actually, that's how you will, continue to be able to make an impact way beyond your career, by actually being an ally now who works on dismantling some of those systems that aren't serving anyone, and works on really starting to think how they can, create a bunch of advocates, accomplices, activists, for the next generation, because they are very, very switched on to this kind of thing. Yeah. But they do live in a world of so many influences as well. It's very, very interesting world that they live in.
Yeah, but your relevance changes as you and your influence changes. That journey you're on. Yeah, you're not in the same place as you were 10 years ago. Neither's the people you're speaking to, as you said. But your importance is still very much so. I've seen it myself. I'm not doing acting the same way as I did 10 years ago, but I'm seeing the fruits of what I did back during this journey. I'm seeing the people I've sort of mentored and the people that they're mentoring, getting awards and coming. You think, wow. So have I become irrelevant? Not at all. Well, I don't think so. And I think you're in very much not the same position I am, but in your own position, your relevance is greater than ever. But it's very different than it was 10 years ago. That's for sure.
Definitely. And that's the acid test, Stephen, is when people who you mentor are winning the awards, not you. And that's how I see as the standard of being able to actually make a difference, is that it goes beyond you and other people are recognised for the seed that you planted within them.
I'm old enough to have the ones that I mentored. The ones they're mentoring are getting the awards now. It's the great grandchildren getting the awards now. But yeah, it's great. But yeah, don't think you're becoming irrelevant. I can't say that strongly enough.
And I think, Lee, you said it is about asking those questions, and the questions become different, don't they? And all the time, I think just listening to people asking, being curious, there will always be something else that we need to champion and be an ally for.
That's really true, actually, because I've started doing some work in my own company, and it was motivated by sort of leveling out that gender balance. But there's topics that have come up that I would not have thought of, and even experiences that I've been through. And like we talked about, like parental leave, and when I went back to work at 6 weeks after having my son, I was still breastfeeding him. And at that moment, there was nowhere for me to actually express that milk. And then only a few months ago, that sort of come back up at work. And it's like, I've never even thought back to that experience. But the fact is that still hasn't changed. There is still nowhere for women to go. So it is that, like you say, it's that sort of asking those questions. And sometimes those questions and topics are still the same as they were, but you've forgotten those experiences. And, you know, so you need to put yourself back in those shoes or connect with the people who are going through those experiences at that time. Yeah, we are all learning. That is for sure. So I'm going to ask about your careers. So Steve, can you tell us a little bit about just a snapshot? Because again, I'm sure we could talk for hours about this, but where you started to where you are now.
Where I started to where I am now, my goodness, it's full circle. No, it's I'm back to the low down at the bottom. I don't know how to answer that really. I got into the industry my father was an engineer, so my mum helped me get a job, so I got into engineering that way. It was good old fashioned heavy engineering, as they used to go with. We had a foundry. It was rail engineering. We used to make railway tracks, and the company went on a 3-day week, and by a series of events, I ended up on a training course for refrigeration. So I fell into the cooling industry. And since then, it's been the usual progression of, you know, apprenticeships, you know, out on the tools, project management, sales, all this sort of thing. And then some international assignments. So I don't know how you summarize that. So it's been a long and fruitful and progressive career.
You have been with us for a long time, haven't you? But again, I don't mean that in a rude way, and we say this a lot, but in our industry, people fall in. Like, no one ever chooses cooling. We all just end up here. And it's like Hotel California, because you'll never leave.
You'll never leave. No. When I went for a training course, and I think I've said I said to you sometimes, I went for an IT course. I was going to go on IT. And when I went, the course was full. So they said, if you come back in the afternoon, there's a space on the refrigeration one. And I went back and sure there was, so you're straight on. But I remember something, there's a guy called Dave Buchanan from Star Refrigeration who did the interview. He said, if you join this industry, you'll have a job for life. He said, everybody needs to eat, everybody needs comfort, everybody needs cool. They'll always need cooling. You'll always have a job. He said, don't worry about IT. That'll come and go, he said.
They just moved at slightly different speeds, I suppose.
But he was right. He was right about it's been a job for life. Yes.
And Lee, you said you owned a tech company. I mean, that's not a small thing, is it? Like, how did you get to there, and then from there to where you are today?
I went to University of Manchester, dropped out due to mental health challenges, then got back and graduated. And I wanted to go into psychology, but I couldn't actually afford to go in because of the low wages and coming from a relatively deprived background. So I went and thought, I'll get myself a career in finance. That'll line my pockets and mean I can at least help my family and make a difference. So I joined a national bank on the graduate scheme in 2007, right at the top of the economic cycle. And then 8 months later, got spat out and made redundant because of the credit crunch. That sent me back home to my parents who'd sold up. So I ended up working in local government just to get by, but got pretty disheartened with that. And that's when I set up my video game business. Set it up from my parents' back bedroom and got it to a point after 5 years where it had grown and operated across Europe. Young leader, lots of mistakes, lack of life experience, but just tried to make it a good place. Then got ill, then had to learn to walk again, went through all those challenges and obviously stopped me, made me step out of the business, reflect, spend time as a stay-at-home dad, and then start to think about how I could actually build something impactful. I think the first business I'd grown to prove people wrong. The second one, I wanted to build something that made a difference in the world. So that's where I'm at today. Started a wellbeing business, doing a lot in the workplace, looking at strategy and training, now delivering, across a range of different sectors. I very much enjoy being able to go in there and empower people from a health perspective, but also challenge things around the sustainability of people, which also includes things such as inclusion, equity, and things such as systems and processes. which again are quite often biased and have been designed a certain way by a certain type of person, usually quite a while ago. So yeah, I'm just that one who asks awkward questions and makes a bit of a nuisance of himself.
I think that does apply to both of you from my experience and knowledge of you both. But we are grateful for that. We definitely are. One of the other things we talk about, we always sort of this running theme for our podcast, we have this WTF moment. We've had some really interesting ones actually, but I was wondering if either of you had an experience, and it might not necessarily be an experience that happened to you, something that you witnessed that you just think, did I just see that, or did I just hear that, or something that really shocked you. Just trying to think of some good ones. I mean, an experience that I had, and it's maybe not so much of a shock, but when I was doing my apprenticeship, part of my training was that we went away as a college for a week to Amsterdam, and immediately everybody thinks, well, that's just a week-long party, but it was actually about going out to visit sites. There was a factory out there, a major compressor factory, to go and see how these things are put together. Every single apprentice before me had been on that trip as part of their course. The company had funded the travel and stay, and they went along. And when I went to get the form signed off, I was told that I wouldn't be allowed to go because it's a lads' week.
Did you have the wrong body part?
Yes. No questions about what experience would be gained. What will you be looking at? The fact that every single apprentice before me was allowed to go to that, and I wasn't. And I was so early in my career that I didn't even say anything. I just walked back out of the office and accepted that I wasn't going to be doing that part of the apprenticeship.
I'm well known, before we go over to Stephen and Lee, I think I'm well known at work for getting really annoyed at her hearing the word blokey in a room 3 times over, that I just kind of lost it a little bit. It was kind of like, can we stop using the word blokey? And everyone I wasn't even supposed to be there, but it was talking about something, and I was like, really? And this wasn't that long ago, to be honest.
This really was a life-changing moment. All the kids on Easter Street used to play football, and it was on the street. It wasn't in the park or anything. And each day, they'd line up, and the 2 tallest would sort of stand up and pick the teams one by one. So you always had a diverse team. And right down from the tall to the short, and the athletic and not so athletic. And you sometimes had some girls attend one day. And so you could say we had total diversity in every aspect. And one day my mum spoke to me afterwards. She said, I saw you playing football, and Alice was playing. I said, oh, yeah, that's right. Why didn't you pass her the ball? And I thought, oh. But it really wasn't one of those moments. But it really, and I've seen that in the boardroom. I see that everywhere now. I see women being included, and I see them not having the ball passed to them. And the next game I did pass the ball, and she was blinking better than I expected, I've got to say, Alice. But there you are. That's a different story. But it really was one of those life-changing moments. And just one, I'll be very quick on this one because I know we're short of time. It was the day I accepted I got the RAC Gold Award and for World Refrigeration Day. But that day, I'd helped a dyslexic person, an engineer, go for a job interview. And I'd warned them in advance he was going for this, He phoned me afterwards. He couldn't get through the gatehouse because he couldn't sign the getting on the site form because he couldn't read and write. He was so embarrassed. And that was we try and make change, but you've got to think the whole process through. Sorry, I took 2 stories, but that really was a shocking moment for me.
Yeah, I'll go really quickly with one that can just make people laugh rather than being rather serious. So on my first day of my graduate scheme, I got a little bit too curious, ended up on the leadership floor, and then found I couldn't activate the lifts to get back anywhere. So I had to go and knock on the door of the deputy CFO of a national bank and say, I'm stuck, can you help me get back down? At which point they got security to come up and escort me to the right floor to make sure I didn't, end up in any places where I shouldn't be. Needless to say, I think my cohort referred to me as the trouble after that. Because curiosity got the better of me. But I'm still like a 7-year-old kid now. I'm still like to do things like that every day in my work. But that's what drives this professional troublemaker tag that I sometimes get labelled with. And both me and Stephen we are professional troublemakers.
I like that.
Yeah, that disruption.
Yeah, I think we all like that. I think that's why we are where we are.
Disruptors sounds better than troublemakers, but I know what you mean. I think we do try disruptors.
I like troublemaker.
it's turning it into something good, isn't it? And it's something I've always been known for that. When we were at school, we didn't have a girls rugby team, and all I wanted to do was play rugby, and I just moaned and whinged and got other people to whinge about it until they finally gave in and we had a girls rugby team. But I was always known as that, that one that is always being a bit challenging, I think was the way they described me.
I can believe that somehow. I haven't met you. Yeah,
and keep up the good work. Just want to say thank you to Stephen and Lee. Lisa Jane, really, really good chat. I think, as always, I've learnt so much. It's been really nice to listen to some of those thoughts and ideas, and certainly more about, asking more questions and listening as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this podcast. I hope you found it interesting and inspiring. Please download the rest of the series and keep an eye out for social media posts where you can listen again, see what's next, and share with your colleagues, and even let us know what you want to hear more of. You can get more involved with our LinkedIn group, IOR Women in RACHP, and help to spread the network. Please get in contact if you would like to reach out about anything where we can support you further. Thanks, everyone.